Hello everybody, it's story time again. Give a couple of minutes to let people get logged in and join us for our story. Today's story is the tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a very old story that comes to us from the area of Europe that is now Germany. And this is a story that was written down by the Grimm's brothers when they collected all of the fairy stories and the folk stories that people used to tell to their families. So this is the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once, long ago, there was a beautiful, gentle, kind queen. And one day she was sitting next to the window in the middle of the winter and she was sewing. But she was thinking about something else, so she wasn't really paying attention to her sewing, and she pricked her finger. Ouch! And as she dropped her sewing and, oh, I pricked my finger, one drop of blood and another drop of blood and another drop of blood fell out of her finger right onto the snow right next to the window where she was sitting. And she saw that beautiful red blood on the beautiful white snow with the black window frame just next to it. She said, "Oh, how I wish I could have a beautiful young daughter with skin white like snow and hair black as the ebony of the window frame and lips as red as the blood." Well, a little while later, the queen did have a daughter, and she did have skin white like the snow, lips red as the blood, and hair black as the ebony of that window frame. She was a very beautiful young girl, and she grew up to be a very gentle and beautiful young princess, just like her mother was. Well, one day, the queen became sick, and she died. And the king was very sad, but he decided that he was tired after a while of being lonely, and he wanted to get married again. So he did. Well, when he got married again, he chose a woman who was very beautiful on the outside, but inside her heart was proud and cruel. And the greatest thing that she wanted in life was to always be the most beautiful person in the world. And she had an enchanted mirror. And she knew that her mirror could not lie to her. So she would go to the room in the tallest tower of the castle where she kept it, and she would say, "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror would say, "You are the fairest, Lady Queen, the fairest this land has ever seen." And she was happy. But Snow White was growing up into a beautiful young girl, and then a beautiful young woman. And after a bit, even the humblest kitchen maid began to say, "Do you know, I think our princess is actually more beautiful than the queen." And sure enough, the day came when the queen went up to her tall tower and she said, "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror said, "You were the fairest, Lady Queen. Now Snow White is the fairest ever seen." Well, the queen was not happy with that answer. So she began to think how she could get rid of the king's daughter, the princess. She needed her gone so that she could be the most beautiful in the land again. And she thought about it for a while. And she thought about it. And eventually she came up with an idea. There was one huntsman that she was pretty sure would do anything she asked him to do. And so she called him to her, and she said, "Huntsman, I wish you to take Snow White into the forest, and I wish you to kill her and bring me back her heart and her tongue as proof that you have done this. And if you do not do this, I will kill you and your family." Well, the huntsman was horrified. He did not want to have to kill the princess, but there was not much he could do about it, for he did not want the queen to kill him and his family. So one day he took the young Princess Snow White deep into the forest, and when they got to a place that was dark and lonely, he pulled out his knife and he said, "I am sorry, Princess, but the queen has ordered me to kill you, and if I do not, she will kill me and my family." Snow White threw herself on the ground and she cried and she pleaded and she said, "Please, please do not kill me. I promise I will not go back to the palace. I will live in the forest. I will never come back to the palace. I promise. Just let me live." She looked so beautiful and so innocent there that the huntsman could not bear to kill her. He said, "Very well. If you leave and go and do not come back to the palace, I will kill a wild boar, and I will take its heart and its tongue back to the queen. Go, quickly." And Snow White got up and ran off, and the huntsman went and he found a wild boar and he killed it, and he brought its heart and its tongue back to the queen, and she was very satisfied, for she was sure that she was now the most beautiful ever seen. But Snow White, she kept running through the forest. She was terrified. She knew that there were wild beasts in the forest, and she was so afraid they would attack her. As she ran and she ran through the grass and through the thorn bushes and through the trees, and her dress got torn. And even though the wild animals saw her, they did not attack her. And after a while, she began to slow down a little bit, and she began to walk. And she walked, and she walked. And eventually, she came out into a little clearing, and she found a little house there. And she, "Oh, it is beginning to get dark. Perhaps the people that live in this house will be kind enough to let me stay with them tonight." And so she went up to the house and she knocked on the door. And she knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Well, perhaps the house is abandoned, and I can just go inside and sleep tonight, and then I'll find someplace else in the morning. So she opened the door. Well, she quickly knew the house was not abandoned, for it was a very neat, very tidy little house, and she was so pleased to see it. It was a very, very pretty little house with a table with a sparkling white tablecloth on it, and little plates and cups and forks and spoons and knives set out on the table, and some food on all of the plates, and a drink in all of the cups. And there were 7 little beds lined up against the wall. Well, Snow White wasn't quite sure what to do with this, but she went to the table and she cut herself a thin little slice of bread so that she wouldn't be taking much of the people's food, and she took a little tiny piece of meat off of each one of the plates so that they all still got to eat plenty of food, and she ate the food, and she took a little sip of a drink out of one of the cups, and it tasted kind of like maybe apple juice, and then she felt very tired. "Oh, I hope the people who live here will not mind if I sleep on one of their beds for a little while." And she went and laid herself down on one of the beds. Well, as it happened, that cottage belonged to 7 dwarves. And these were men who would go into the mountains every day, and they would go into a mine, and they would dig up gold and jewels and iron and all kinds of things, which they would then take and make things out of, and they would sell the things that they made. Well, those little men, those little dwarves, they came home from the mines that night, and they were quite surprised to find that there was a young girl sleeping in one of their beds. But they looked at her. They wondered who she was. Well, she's sleeping so soundly, and she was so pretty that they just didn't have the heart to wake her. And so they all ate their dinner very quietly and went to bed in their own little beds, and one of the little men shared his bed with his friend. Well, the next morning, just as the sun was coming up, Snow White woke up, and she was quite frightened to find seven dwarfs staring down at her. Oh my goodness! But they all smiled at her so kindly and said, "Hello, who are you? Where did you come from? What are you doing here?" And so she told them who she was and all about her evil stepmother who had tried to have her killed and how she had run through the forest and she was just looking for some place to sleep and she was very sorry if she had bothered them. And they said, "Oh, no, 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 no. Snow White, it is clear that you cannot go back to the palace. How about if you were to stay here with us? And you can do the cooking and the cleaning and the mending of our clothes and things like that for us while we go to the mines and do our work. And how would that be?" And she said, "Oh, I would love that. That would be wonderful. I would have a place to stay, and I like to cook and to sew and to knit and cleaning. I love doing it all." They said, "Oh, wow, that's wonderful." So they went off to work in the mine. And Snow White did all the cleaning and some knitting and fixed some clothes for them and cooked a delicious meal. And when they came back, they sat down to supper and they said, "I think we've made a very good bargain here, Snow White. You're a very good cook. Will you stay with us forever?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I will. I would love that." And so time went by. And Snow White cooked and cleaned and did the sewing, and the dwarves brought pretty things back from the mountain for her and when they were mining, and it was a beautiful life. Well, you might be wondering what happened to that huntsman. He took that heart and the tongue of the wild boar back to the queen, and she was very pleased, for she thought she was free of Snow White forever. She was so sure she was free of Snow White forever that it was a couple of months before she went back and asked her mirror who was the most beautiful. And the day she did it, she just happened to be in the tower for something else, and she passed by the mirror, and she kind of, like it was a habit, she said, "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, by the way, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror said, "You were the fairest, Lady Queen. Now Snow White is the fairest seen. Amidst the forest, darkly green, she lives with 7 dwarves, I ween." And that just means I know, or I learned. Well, the queen was furious. She was not happy that the huntsman had betrayed her, and she needed to come up with a way to get rid of Snow White. So she thought about it, and she thought about it for a couple of days, and she came up with a plan. She went and she borrowed clothes from an old peddler woman, and she stained her face and her hands and her neck with some dye so that her skin looked very brown. And she went through the forest until she came to the cottage. And she knocked at the door of the cottage and she said, "Beautiful colored laces for sale. Beautiful colored laces. Come out, dearie, and I'll find you a pair of laces to match your eyes." For she could see Snow White watching her from the window. Now see, you might be wondering what kind of laces she's talking about. Well, back in those days and in that area, girls and women wore a dress that looks like this. And it has laces on the front. And you would tie up the laces and tie it off, and that's how you put your dress on. There were no zippers or buttons or anything like that. They would just tie up the dress in the front, and that was how you would lace it. Well, Snow White thought about it. She said, "Well, my dwarfs don't like me talking to strangers, but I'm sure they would like me to have some of those very pretty laces." And so she opened the door and she went outside. And the old peddler woman looked at her and said, "Your eyes look like they might be a very pretty shade of blue, my dear. I have some very pretty blue laces here. how about we try these in your dress? And so she took out the old laces and she put in the new laces and she began to lace up the dress. And she took those laces and she pulled them tight, 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 so tight that Snow White couldn't breathe. And she fainted. And she fell down on the ground and she looked like she was dead. So the evil queen let out a little chuckle. And then she ran off into the forest, back to the palace. Well, the dwarfs just got to feeling uneasy that day, and so they went home from work early. And they came home from work and they found Snow White lying on the doorstep, and they ran to her and, oh my goodness, she's not breathing. Oh, there's laces. These laces are too tight. Someone cut the laces. And so they cut the laces, and Snow White started to breathe again. Oh, thank goodness they weren't too late. So they picked up Snow White and they carried her in and they laid her on her bed. And eventually she opened her eyes and they said, Snow White, what happened? And she told them about the old peddler woman and the laces and how she had tied them up too tight and Snow White couldn't say anything, and then she couldn't breathe and she had passed out. And the wisest of the dwarves said to her, Snow White, I do believe that was your evil stepmother in disguise. You really should not open the door to anyone while we are at the mines. You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it. I won't do it again. Well, after a bit of time, the stepmother, the queen, the evil queen, went back up to her tower, and she said to the mirror, Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all? And the mirror said, You were the fairest, Lady Queen, but Snow White is the fairest ever seen. Oh, she was very upset. She turned purple and green from envy and rage, and she stamped her feet on the floor. She thought she had killed Snow White. Well, she'd have to come up with a new plan. And so she thought for a while, and she came up with a new plan. And she dressed herself up in old clothes, and she made her face a little dirty. And she went out into the forest, and she got near the cottage, and she started calling, Combs for sale, combs for sale, who would like a pretty comb for their hair? See, in those days, they used to wear combs that looked a lot like this, and they would stick them in their hair as a decoration. And she got close to the cottage, and she could see Snow White peeking at her out of the window, and she said, Oh, hello, dearie. I've a very beautiful comb here. See how it sparkles. Wouldn't you like to see that? It would look beautiful in your black hair. Won't you come out and let me put it in your hair for you? Snow White said, No, I'm not supposed to open the door to strangers. Oh, dearie, all you have to do is open the door. You don't have to come out. I can just reach in and slip it in your hair for you. It won't take but a minute. Well, all right. I won't be coming out the door, so I won't be breaking my promise. Snow White really wanted that pretty comb. So she opened the door, and the peddler woman reached up and slipped that comb into her hair, and as soon as she did, the poison that the evil queen had put on that comb began to work, and Snow White fell down on the floor as if she were dead. And the queen, she let out an evil chuckle, and she ran into the forest and back to the palace. Well, again, the dwarves felt a little bit uneasy that day for some reason, and so they came home early. And when they got home, they found Snow White laying there as if she were dead. And they looked at her and they saw that she was wearing a new comb in her hair. And so they reached up and they pulled it out of her hair. And very soon she began to open her eyes. And they said, Oh, hooray, we're not too late. We were so afraid. The poison hasn't begun to take effect yet. And soon Snow White opened her eyes, and they asked her what happened, and she told them, and they said, "Snow White, you must not open the door to anyone. Clearly that was your evil stepmother. You must promise not to open the door to any strangers." "I promise," she said. I won't do it again. I promise." Well, the queen got home, and she went up to her tower all proud of herself. "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror said, "You were the fairest, Lady Queen, but now Snow White is the fairest seen." Oh! She knew she had failed yet again to kill Snow White. She knew she needed a really good plan this time. So she thought about it for a while, and she came up with a really good plan. And she went to her tower, and she used her special skills, and she made an apple took an apple that was beautiful rosy red apple, and she made it so that half of the apple was filled with poison, and that apple was so beautiful and so tasty looking that no one would refuse to take a bite of it. Well, she dressed herself up as a plump, jolly farmer's wife, and she went off down the road. And when she got close to the cottage, she started calling, "Apples, apples, who would like to try my apples?" And Snow White saw her, and apples sound delicious, but no, I promised not to open the door. And as the jolly farmer's wife, as she thought she was, got closer, "Apples, oh dearie, I see you there in the window. Wouldn't you like to try my apples? Look at this beautiful apple, aren't they lovely looking?" Snow White opened the window, and she said, I cannot open the door. I promise not to open the door." "Oh, dearie, you don't need to open the door. I can hand it to you right through the window, right like this. Wouldn't you like to try the apple?" And she said, "Well, I don't know." "Oh, dearie, don't worry about the apple. It's nothing, it's harmless, you see." And she took a bite out of the side of the apple that wasn't poisoned. "Delicious apples. My man grows the best apples in his orchard. Wouldn't you like to try it, dearie?" The apple did look good, and the farmer's wife had eaten a bite, and it hadn't done her any harm. So Snow White reached down out of the window, and she took the apple. And she took a bite, and no sooner had she taken a bite than she fell down on the ground, dead. Well, the wicked old queen laughed and laughed, and she ran off through the forest back to the castle. And when she got there, she went up to the tower, and she said, "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror said, "You are the fairest, Lady Queen." And she knew that she had succeeded this time. Well, the dwarfs felt uneasy again, and so they came home early again, and when they got home, the door was still locked. But Snow White was laying on the ground in the house, and nothing they did could revive her, and they knew that this time, the evil queen had succeeded. And she was dead, and they brushed her hair out very pretty, and they laid her out in her most beautiful dress. They could not bear to bury Snow White under the ground. And so they made a coffin made entirely out of glass, so that her beauty would be seen no matter what happened. And they laid that glass coffin out on a stone outside their house. And every day, one of the dwarves stayed back from the mine and stood guard over the coffin. So only 6 of them went to work now, and 1 stayed behind. Well, after a time, a young prince was riding through the forest with all of his attendants, and he went past the house and he saw the beautiful girl in the coffin, and he thought she was asleep at first because she still looked just as beautiful as she had in life, with her skin white like snow and her lips red as blood and her hair black as ebony. Well, unfortunately, it was the dwarf who was standing guard who had to tell the prince that she was not sleeping, she was dead. And the prince was so sad, and he just stood there, and he stayed all day at that coffin. And he was there the next day, standing and watching and staring at her and just thinking how beautiful she was and how gentle she looked. And the dwarves told him stories about Snow White, and the prince began to fall in love with her. And he asked the dwarves if he could take her back to his kingdom with him. And they told him no. And he offered them money, and they said, "She is not for sale." But the prince came back every single day, and after a while they began to realize that the prince loved her as much as they did. Well, the dwarves began to think that perhaps they were being a little selfish, keeping Snow White there in the forest with them. And so they decided that they would let the prince take Snow White back to his kingdom, where everyone in the world could come and see how beautiful she was. And the prince was overjoyed, so he brought all of his attendants with him, and they picked up the coffin, and they began to walk back to his kingdom. But as they walked, one of those men caught his foot in a tree root, and he stumbled, and the coffin fell, and it tipped. And that piece of apple that Snow White had eaten, she hadn't actually swallowed it. It just gotten stuck in the back of her throat. And it fell out. And almost immediately, Snow White's eyes opened, and she sat up. And everyone was excited and so happy. She wasn't dead after all. She had just been sleeping. She was poisoned, but she was not dead. And the prince took her up, and he told her all about himself, and he talked to her for a bit, and he found she was just as gentle as she looked, and he asked her if she would marry him. And she was not sure, but the dwarves took her into the house with them, and she was so happy to see her dwarves and to see that they were doing all right. And eventually she decided that yes, she would like to be married, and she would be like to be married to the handsome and kind prince. And so she agreed to go back to his kingdom. And she said, "But my dwarves must be invited to the wedding." "Of course your dwarves will be invited to the wedding. They can come and visit us anytime they like." And so the prince took Snow White back to his kingdom, and they were married. And the dwarves came, and that made Snow White so very happy. Well, a prince cannot get married without other kings and queens hearing about it. And so, of course, the evil queen heard about the wedding, and she heard about the beautiful princess who had been found in the forest, who had skin as white as snow, and lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony, and she could not believe her ears. So she went up to the mirror, and she asked the mirror, and she knew the mirror could not lie to her, and the mirror told her that the new princess was indeed Snow White, and that she was still alive. And the old queen was so angry and so furious that she actually burst into flames and burnt up into a pile of ashes. And of course, the dwarves had nothing to do with her dying, but they heard about it, and they were able to go and tell Snow White the next time they visited that she need no longer fear her evil stepmother. And so Snow White and her prince were able to live very happily, and if they haven't died, then they're living still. And that is the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I hope you enjoyed it. And let's see, today is Friday, so I think on Monday at about 3 o'clock Central Daylight Time here on the Milledgeville Public Library IL Facebook page, we will be telling another story, and I think Well, so many of us have heard of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but did you know there's another girl whose name was Snow White? So on Monday at 3 o'clock, I believe we will hear the story of Snow White and her sister, Rose Red. Bye, have a great weekend!